I'm just going to tell you about a moment when I recall failing, my greatest moment of failure. This photographer and artist, Will Stacy, who's a friend of mine, wrote a book called Pictures Not Taken, and in it he edited a book, and it was a series of, and he has a blog also called Pictures Not Taken, and it's a series of essays, short essays by photographers, some more well known than others, but writing about the photographs that they didn't take, and kind of, for whatever reason, they chose not to take a picture in that moment, considering the photography is all about documentation. And for me, the moment I spoke about was at my cousin Sanga's funeral, where it was, in a way, it was a big day for me. It was the moment where I had to become a man. I had to speak at my first time speaking in public, and stand in for our family and the loss of this cousin who had been murdered. And as a photographer, I felt like I needed to document it, and so I had my big 6x7 camera, and I was like photographing. It took like 5 or 6 photographs, and at some point I felt like the photographs were never going to do enough. It was the moment I realized that photography had failed for me. Like, I couldn't sum up all the emotions I was feeling in that moment, or that other people were feeling, in a picture. And so
But you did use those photographs later.
Well, that's what happened. So I failed. I applied to graduate school. Soon after, I didn't use those pictures, but when I got to graduate school, I had these 5 pictures up for most of my first 2 years, actually, that I took of his funeral. That I was like trying to reorganize in a square and a grid to try to figure, how to make them mean something. And then later, I had this idea of using the language of advertising to talk about social issues, which became the Branded Project. And I came up with this text for like a priceless type ad, and I had an image for it, and I was working with a friend who's a graphic designer, and he was looking at it. He was like, well, maybe do you have any other image that could work for this text? And then it clicked that I had these pictures I had taken 4 or 5 years earlier that I could never find a place for, and that was the moment when I used a picture for my cousin's funeral with this text, and it wound up being this kind of really perfect mix, and it was probably one of the strongest pieces I ever made. But it was really because, and it's one of those moments where, like, if I hadn't tried and failed 4 years before, this other thing might not have been possible, and also I had failed in my putting it with the first image, and so there's that second shot that kind of made this synergy of a really powerful piece, which I thought was very heartfelt and meant a lot for me. But when I put it up in Birmingham, it was seen as a failure because the people in the black community found it to be offensive, because they thought it was a MasterCard ad that was, making light of homicide in the black community. So, and then I had to write an op-ed, and I had to defend it, so it became another chance at, my failure led to another opportunity for success, because I think I did defend it well, and it was really kind of a great opportunity to learn to talk about my work, not just in art context, but in a real life context. I think failure is an essential part of success. Until you fail, you really don't know your limits. And oftentimes when we fail, it's not our limit. It reminds us, because we recognize what made us fail, and helped us realize, okay, we could have gone a little bit further with it, or or it didn't damage us as much as we thought we could, and we can take more, risk. And so,
when you work with found images from ads and other archives, where does the vulnerability or responsibility come in for you? Where do your personal stakes come into it?
Well, I think my personal stakes come into every time when I use a picture that I didn't take and put it out as mine, because at any moment someone can say, that's stealing, or you didn't take that, or you're not creative. So that's always, for me, right there. And I think there is this degree of trying to recognize, well, is there another way that I could make this point, tell this story? Is this going to be interesting to just me or someone else, you know? And if I can find myself a strong argument for something being valuable outside of my own kind of whimsy or curiosity, to either to appropriate it or to recontextualize it, then I feel like it needs to be done. But at the same time, it's on a certain level, it's not as fun as when I was out taking pictures and like in the dark room and printing them, and that's process of being physically and temporally really engaged in every step of it. But at the same time, now when we have digital cameras and, you know, constant like access to images and reproduction and printing and everything happens right now, that it's just times have changed. And so like I don't find it as in like it's gonna be that much harder for me to really, and I have photo projects that I'm working on and thinking about, but to make an image that is really, really, really important right now, when we have millions of pictures being taken as we speak, literally around the world, for me to try to make one image that really means something is a real tall order. And so with my work, I often see myself and talk about myself as like, you know, trying to make sense of the images we're creating right now. And part of it, you could say, is for me recognizing my failure to be like the most creative, ingenuitive photographer of this moment. Or you can see it as my realization that like it's not always about chasing the light to be the greatest, but also about recognizing how we can frame, how important it is to look at what we're already putting out there and framing it and reframing it in a way that we can look at the world and our history and our present in a different way.
So when you use an image like these on the wall behind you of a lynching, what kind of questions go through your process in terms of, okay, hey, I'm bringing this image back to bear again? Like, why? What?
Well, the first thing that comes up for me is guilt. Like, this is an image that's sacred. It should be, or you know, it's an image of someone who's been tortured and murdered. And should I be looking at it, much less showing it or pondering it? And then I think, well, there was a book about it, Without Sanctuary, which, you know, did a relatively classy job of, you know, representing these images. And then I think James Marshall did something with that. And, you know, I started thinking many other artists have dealt with lynching in images of especially a black body being tortured. And what am I going to say that's new? Can I say anything new? Can I do it in a way that's not going to be seen as disingenuous or responded to with like disdain? And then I say, that's a good question. You need to ask people, you know, from various point of view, some more cynical, some more aesthetic, some more intellectual, some uninformed, like about how they feel about the images and what they think about me using them in this context. And then through those dialogues, I really gain my own point of view, because I'm probably the most critical at first, and fortunately, because by the time most of my work's already been out there, I've asked, you know, 5, 10 people with very different opinions the hard questions of like, is this bad? Is this tacky? Is this nasty? Is this mean? Is this disrespectful? And have heard enough ranges of responses that I can really defend it if I chose to go forward with it. So this is work that's very much work in progress that I feel uncomfortable about, which is ironic because I chose to sit here. But like that's why I did it, because I want to like, maybe this work will never be out in the world. And so that's for me a real question of like, again, if I don't get to the point where like, for me to what degree my work is successful, it's because I've gotten to the point of like it being a full total failure, and then probably scaled it back to being like, this is where it still has resonance. And this is where it's not just a one-liner. This is where it's not just aesthetic. This is where it's not just kind of shock value.